Hello there, this is CE Sim Golf. My name is Chris Anderson. I'm going to take you through some of the way I do some rock work. This course in particular does not actually have rock work in it, but it's a good place to kind of do an example in a test file. Let's kind of jump over here because this area has some terrain that you could buy. It could be rock area, right? Maybe in the SAT or in the actual course, this is a cliff. Now, of course, the easy way to do this, or maybe not easy, but the way most people are going to do this is you're going to start adding either painted rocks as part of your SAT materials or as your moss materials with vertex paint, and probably add some rock assets as well. You could do scattered rocks. You can find any number of cliff downloads and scans and things like that on many different 3D sites. I've got a bunch here already that I've used. You can see a lot of the way I've done this on my course, the ledges, but let's just drop some in and see. So I'm looking at a couple of prefabs over here. These are ones that I think I'm just going to use for this example. You can see, find where the folder is. I've got them underneath my asset folder, CE Sim Golf, under rocks. I've got a whole bunch of stuff in here. So we're going to use these, and I'm going to drop a couple in. For now, we're just going to use 2, 3, 4. That's an easy start, right? So now, the way to do this is you can do it in Unity by positioning them, and of course, if you can copy and paste and use them in different orientations to make them not be so repetitive, I think that's the way, most people are going about things. So you would duplicate like that, and then, rotate it however you want. And it's going to be a lot of manual work. If you're doing a lot of little rocks, you could use like a prefab brush or something like that. You can try and just manually place these until they're kind of interacting with terrain. And then what you could do is you could go into your meshes in Blender and start playing back and forth, stretching the terrain, trying to make it match where your rocks are going to sit to make that wall, right? There's another way. You could do this work all inside Blender, and it gives you other ways to control tri-counts and densities and just a lot more control in general over the way that you position and mold things to your terrain. So again, I'm going to delete these out of here. And we're going to remember that we're using rocks 2, 3, and 4. You can right click and you can say find in Show and Explorer. So you want all this stuff already installed in Unity before you do this. Is the easiest way with the materials applied, all that stuff. So I'm going to drag this back over here. So this shows me in my Explorer window where these are housed. We're going to just go by type. So we don't want the prefabs, right? We're going to want to find the FBX files. So we're going to close this. Because this is a prefab, we're going to go and find the model for this. So it's going to be under, here's where the actual models are, in this meshes folder. That's what I really want. So I'm going to grab and do the same thing. Now we can see we've got, not that one. So it's going to be one of these. Which one was it? It's not highlighting it. Rock 3, 23, 7. Okay, so it's this set right here. So we're going to go into our Blender file, and we're going to use the same Blender file that has the meshes, right? And maybe save a new one, call it Rockwork, something like that. Always good to have many iterations. This is the same place in the course over here. This is an older set of meshes, so it's not as dense as some of the new meshing. It's very easy to subdivide and get denser meshes. I would suggest doing that if you're going to be working in this area anyway. We can do that at first. We'll just go to faces. We know that we're going to be doing cliff work along here. We can just select all these faces. Try not to select anything that touches the perimeter of a mesh. And then just do right click and subdivide as S. So now we have double the mesh density in this particular area. Now, if we go back to our folder where we have these files and we go, let's just start with 2, that's easy enough. And all you have to do is drag it and it'll say import FBX. And where is it? Where'd it go? Well, it's always going to import to what's called the 3D cursor. And you can move what the 3D cursor is. It's going to default to the origin of the scene, which means it'll default to some corner of your scene. What you can do to always import where you want it to be, do right click with shift held down. You're going to see that's your cursor. So now when we import, it's going to do the same thing. It's going to put it in the same location when you import it. But because you have that cursor in the general area where you want this to go, you can do Shift S, and then what you're going to do is you're going to go selection to cursor. So that's going to take it's going to take that thing that you have selected that you just imported, and it's going to move it right to where you were pointing that cursor at. Now, you can manipulate this, and depending on your Blender skills, you can easily, I think, much more easily change the size, the location, rotation, all that stuff I think is easier in Blender. It's not going to come in with fully formed materials, but it is going to have some of them. So you can see that if you go to the shaded view, that you have your rock on there. It's easier to just work in this view for just speed and quality and things like that. So let's just go extreme. Let's make this pretty big. So S key is going to be scale. It's going to make it pretty big, right? Now we're going to sink this down a little bit into our terrain. And maybe we want to, so G is the key for moving. It is view dependent. So if you're looking this way, it's going to move it up and down that way or around. If you're straight overhead, it's going to move it without moving it up or down, just back and forth. So you are going to want to use a combination of views to try and get it where you want it. And you can constrict movement. So you could do, even if you're in this view, you could do G key followed by Z, which is the up and down axis. You'll see your blue line. You can then only move it up and down, so that can be helpful. You can see it's kind of tipped away from the land at this point. So it's just like in Unity. You're trying to fit that to the terrain. And then you'd want to bring in a couple more as well. So let's grab, let's grab 4. Let's bring that in. And again, now because we've imported it, it's selected. We'll do Shift S, and we will move it here. We'll resize it a bit. And you can see how you can bring these in. Now, the cool thing is, if you export these back to Unity, they're going to maintain their UV mapping, which means all of their material mapping will stay the same. I'm going to tip these back a little bit towards the R key for rotate, like that. So anything you do in here, position-wise, is not going to change the way it appears in Unity. But you can do things to reshape them and fit them. So I'm going to rotate that, like that, do a little overlap thing. All right, I think this is enough just to kind of get a general idea of things. All I've done is resize them at this point, and now I'm going to try and make this terrain fit to them. So what I'm going to do, grab my terrain that I've already subdivided, and I'm going to try and make this fit to them. You can see right now they're kind of nicely going through the terrain. I'm going to select a few areas. You could even go to your X-ray so you can see what you're grabbing underneath. And if you want to be really precise, you can use the K, which is a knife, and you can kind of cut your way. It's not going to like to do that with those objects. Or a J, which will join. So if you want to have kind of a boundary that will give you, yeah, I had 3 selected. Doesn't want to do those 2. All right, so that's where you'd knife. But anyway, I'm doing different things to subdivide. Just give myself more detail. And I'm going to follow this border. And now with proportional editing, if I do G and then only up and down, you'll see that I can then manipulate my terrain to interact with those rocks just the way I want. I can do just one of these at a time, one vertex at a time to kind of just position things. Now I don't want the rock floating out in the middle of nowhere, so I might want to bring my terrain up so there's the rock sitting in it there, like this. I'm going to make my proportional a little smaller. All right, now what if I want my terrain to come all the way straight to that, right? That would be something that would be very helpful, I think, in this case. You can even delete faces in this way. So trying to get a view of which ones we aren't going to need. I'm going to take away kind of just a string of faces that are going to end up being underneath our rocks, so we're not going to need them. Like this. So all of these terrain triangles are not needed because they're going to be underneath where our cliff is. So we're going to delete those. Now we've got these gaps, no big deal. What we're going to do though is we're going to grab kind of these border ones, and we don't have to do all of them at once. And if you go overhead, then we're going to be able to, we're going to turn our proportional way down. You can be able to drag them over until you can see that they are all about where you want them as far as meeting or being covered by rocks. Now this is only in the XY axis. They might not be the right height, right? And you also might want to just kind of drag some of these and kind of even out the spacing on them so that you have a nice smooth transition. And then you'll want to go down in this mode. You can see you're still going to find gaps in different views. So we're going to move it up. And what we want is all this terrain to leave no gaps between rock and terrain, because obviously any gaps, just like gaps between meshes, would end up causing potential spots for balls to fall through, right? And then that's bad stuff. So I'm finding each vertex and each, and going, okay, those are all interacting. Well, I want the terrain to be a little more like that. Bring this one up here. All right, now here I've got these rocks sticking out a bit like that. Maybe what I want is these vertices that are this edge to come up a little farther so that it's kind of meeting, so that the ground kind of comes vertically across more straight to the top of these rocks, and then it's the cliff straight down, right? And you can see we still have a little bit of gaps going on and stuff here. The cool thing is, not only can you modify the meshes in here, these rocks are also just a mesh, right? It's all just 3D objects, so you can edit these. If I were to select all of these, and I were to grab like a part of this rock over here, and I use proportional editing. Now, if I did this, and I brought that back in, these textures are going to be terrible. They're going to be super stretched. We could probably even see it here. You can see that just looks awful, right? Like you can't get away with that. But there's no reason you can't move things a little bit. And if you move things in proportion, you're going to be fine. No one's going to know the difference. So right here, I have a gap. And I'm just going to grab a little bit of this rock. And instead of doing like a big move in a small zone, I'm going to do a really gentle move across a large area. And I'm going to move this one down a little bit. And as long as you're not doing crazy large moves, your textures are not going to get screwed up. They're going to look fine in the end. And I did a ton of work on this kind of stuff when I was doing fitting of cliffs in the ledges. And it's going to be just fine. You just don't want to make big moves in short distances, right? You want to spread out changes over as far as you can, and it's going to be just fine if you do it that way. So I'm going to even move that out a little bit, like that. I'm just going to and I'm going to move some of this stuff kind of more towards where I made the changes. Increase the size of my change so it's gentle. That, and then I think I might have so there's not gaps here, right? But the way that interacts, you might want to stick another rock in here, even in Unity, just because it'd be somewhere a ball could get stuck. There is a little gap down there. We can just kind of move this corner of rock up. That'll close that gap. You just want to make sure you see your terrain and your rocks are touching everywhere. So there are not any gaps or spots like that. So by doing back and forth with terrain or your rocks, it is going to give you kind of a perfectly molded terrain. Now let's talk about how we can get this back in Unity exactly where we want it. Let's start by looking at the meshes. There's something in every mesh, whether it is a mesh of terrain or any 3D object that somebody modeled in Blender in any way, it has something called an origin. And the origin is this tiny little orange dot. So the origin usually is at the base of the geometry and centered on it. And that's what centers it or places it in the world. It's the 0, 0 coordinate. So you can see each of these came in with an origin attached to it, and they're all pretty close to the bottom center of these objects. But the difference is, if you look at our meshes, do you see a dot anywhere on that mesh? No. Where are the dots? None of these meshes have a dot. So where is the dot? It's way over here at what is the 0, 0 origin of the entire world. And because every single one of these meshes in our terrain has that same origin, that means that when you bring these all into Unity, they interlock and set up together perfectly. Now, how can we change that? We can set origin positions of our objects. So if we go into these and we select all of them and we hit Control A, we can reset all transforms. And if you reset transforms, watch what happens to these dots. They're gone. Where did they go? Well, they went to the 0, 0 of the world, just like the meshes. So if I click on one of these, you'll see that the dot now shows up way over here. The good news about that is they are now exactly positioned the same and relative to all of the terrain meshes. So if you were to select all these, you could even use the OPCD tool export for these meshes. And let's just name them so it's easy. So it's R2, R4. There's two R4s. Okay, we can leave them like that. So let's take these. You have to pay attention to what their name is. You can see the name up in here or over in here on the right side. Or if you hit F2, you can see the name and rename it if you want. So these three objects are going to maintain their same position, their same UV mapping, but they're not going to have, well, they'll have embedded material, but I'll show you how you can change that. So let's use our export down here. Now I've already got, this is AFROD's version, so this is going to export them to my meshes folder. It's going to export it to my FBX folder that's always used for terrain meshes, and that's fine with me because these objects are now, I'm considering part of advanced terrain. They're part of my terrain. So I'm going to export those and go into Unity. Unity is going to spin and load them. And then if I go find that folder, let's see, I want FBX has, here they are. They're all right here. Now if I pull these in and I drop them into my terrain meshes folder, yours might be called FBX. This is where all our meshes live. If I drop them into that folder, they should exactly appear where we had them in Blender. There they are. Now, you'll see that we didn't export our terrain, right? So that's not conformed to it yet. So we'll go back here. We're going to take this mesh. We'll export it. This should automatically update because it's already in our scene. Oh, we're going to have to do... Oh, you know what? I think it did. I think I did not reset that one. We're going to do transforms on that one. I think I accidentally messed up the transforms. There you go. So now that's back in, and we can see if we zoom in, all of our terrain is now shaped exactly how we shaped it in Blender. It all matches. It's a little messy. I didn't do a great job, right? I didn't tweak everything perfectly. But it all matches up to where that cliff is. So you could go in and you can clean up. Like I can see I have some pretty extreme changes here. I have one in particular down here. So I kind of want this to all look a little bit more like the ground is straight across and nice and level. And then the rock is what causes it to go into cliff mode, right? So any changes we make like that and we export, there, much, much better. So now we have molded terrain and a cliff face, and we could use as many of these cliff assets and rocks as we want. And they're going to have embedded material right now. You can see the material's embedded. But all you'd really need to do is go back into wherever that rock prefab came from. In this case, it was under here, and it was... Which one was it? Was it these guys? No. Which set of rocks was this even? Here, these. So if we go in here and we find where these are, the materials are in this folder. So we're going to want to replace those. This is grayed out because it's embedded in this material. So we're going to just drag things over. So we're going to drag that over there. You can see it updates. This is also 4. We're going to update that one. This is 2, I believe. And yeah, that one was a little darker. And the reason we want to drag those over is we can then change these to make them match, just like if they were a regular prefab. So these are not prefabs, they're just meshes, just like your terrain meshes are. And now we have them set up exactly like we want and shaped exactly like we want. Now, the other thing we can do is to save some tries and some draw calls and things like that. We can go in here and we could join these together. So if you select all of them, hit Control J, they become one object, okay? And they should maintain the same material sets. You can see right there. Now, at this point, you might want to rename something. You could call it R, because that's just the call number of those rocks. It'll help me remember what they're from. R cliffs 1. Maybe you'll have a whole bunch of different cliffs. Now, if I export that, it's not going to drop into my scene. It will then import into that same folder over here. It's R cliffs 1. But we would want to get rid of these. And now R cliffs 1 is just a cleaner version of the same thing. It's just one object though, right? So it's going to now have 2 material slots, and you would want to go in and you would want to drop those materials in. So we have R2 and R4. Depending on how many different meshes or prefabs you used, you'd have to add different materials to it. Oh, I see a tiny gap there. Easy to fix in any of those ways I showed you. Next, let's talk about how we can even improve performance doing this. So the one thing about doing things this way is it's going to not use any LOD setup that you might have with prefabs of these rocks that you choose to use. You can create your own LODs and prefabs by adding a decimate modifier. These are pretty low poly. You can see there's not a ton of detail here. I wouldn't worry about it with something like this. And if you have a huge cliff, setting up LODs is going to be difficult because the cliff is always going to be, if it's huge, kind of close to the camera for a long time and not beneficial. But if you can keep the try counts reasonable, I think it's going to be just fine. If you wanted to add decimate, that will help you bring it down. You could go add modifier and go decimate, and this slider will help you limit the count. Now, if you go too crazy, you're going to mess with the UV maps and the just the quality of the texture on it. But you can usually get away with breaking things down a little. Another way to really save counts, though, is to use a Boolean modifier that will remove things that you can't see. Like, I would say over half of the tries in this cliff model are not even seen. They're all underground. So what I did was, if I hide this cliff, I added back the faces I'd removed. You remember when I removed some faces when I was moving things around? You don't have to remove faces, but sometimes it's just easier to not have ground peeking through. Maybe you do want a little bit peeking through. Like when I added these faces back, I got a little bit of a peek through here, which would give a little bit of 3D grass kind of peeking through right there. And that would be kind of realistic, right? Like there's a little weeds growing in your rocks. That's not a huge bad thing, but just be aware that it'll be a little more difficult. But if you have a complete mesh without holes in it, you can usually get away with using it as a cutting modifier. So if I take this and I add what's called a Boolean modifier, and that means something that will either join or cut with another shape. I'm going to do the difference because I want to subtract, and I'm going to select my mesh. So I added the modifier to the rock. Now I'm going to select this ground mesh that's touching it, and that's going to make it cut away the rock. Now you see it did too much, right? So we're going to go from exact to fast, and we're going to try and see if that helps. And there we go. Now our cliff is back. But if we look down here, everything underground is gone. So that is going to save us a ton of tries. Now you can leave the modifier on there, I believe, and just export that. And it should apply the modifier as it's exported, I think. So let's go back, look here. It's going to update. Now if I go underground, yeah, you can see that that cliff, it has removed the faces from underneath. And it's easy to see how much we saved. Let's go back. So this went from being like 17,000 tries down to almost 8. So we more than cut it in half. So if you're doing a lot of cliff work, that's pretty beneficial. The one thing you do have to be careful of is that you don't get any gaps and things like that. You might need to go back, and then if you're seeing gaps, you're going to want to apply this, because anywhere that you change this mesh, it's being referenced as your cutting mesh. So if I were to move this, it's going to continue to cut more rock. So if I move this way up here, it's just going to keep cutting rock, and you might still end up with gaps. So the solution there is, once you know these are where you want, you can apply that, and now that is a brand new geometry. None of that data exists. You'd have to do edit undo to get rid of any of that. But then you can also do things like just take that rock and you could just sink it just a tiny bit. Down into the ground, and that might help. Or you can go back to your grass and you can tweak your mesh and just kind of get things in a final place where you want them. Export, and yep, you can see we still have that gap. I never did fix that. Let's fix it. Let's just do it. Let's fix it so we can see where's our gap at. Is it right here? No. Where is that gap? That looks like where it is. Not sure. You know what? I think it's seeing... Oh, geez. You know what? I never updated this mesh after I added that hole. Fix the hole. There we go. All better. There we go. We have a cliff formed into some rocks. We probably want to make this a little more natural. Add it into that side. Very easy way to do cliffs. I personally just am more comfortable in Blender. I think the moving around are a lot easier, back and forth, and there are shortcuts in Blender to help me do it better. And as long as you're only moving things a little bit, your textures are going to be just fine. They're not going to stretch. It's still going to look really great. And it's much easier to duplicate, move, flip, and just kind of adjust things that way. So that's how I do a lot of rock work in Blender. And I have done a ton of it for cliffs, even for things like walls. Obviously, I've shown that. And rock edges along ponds, all that stuff. It's just, I find it a little easier to do that stuff in Blender. You know I love Blender. And that's how it's the trick of using the OPCD tools to export them and pretend they're just part of the ground. They're just ground meshes. There's nothing fancy or different about ground meshes from any other 3D object, and vice versa. 3D objects can be treated as ground meshes. All right, hope that was really helpful and opened eyes on how to do that a little bit faster and cleaner and with more precision.